All right, we're back live on the set of Book View Now at pbs.org. We're at BookCon 2015. It's day 2. It's been a great conference so far. Amazing, passionate readers running all over the place. One of my favorite things about BookCon is the fact that readers get to come in and meet all of you. Ben Hatke is with us for the full hour as our guest host today, and we now have Lev Grossman on the set. Lev is the author of The Magician's Land, as well as other books in this series, but it's so cool to have you here.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, welcome. And Ben, what I found out when I was talking to Ben, who I'm going to hand the book to, is that he's like, I've read all the books. And then I talked to you, and you're like, I've read all of your books. And I think it's pretty amazing that you guys have never met, though, from what I understand.
This is our first meeting.
I feel like we're going to explode in like antimatter and matter into a puff of
maybe this is dangerous.
Yeah, we won't touch. We'll just sit here.
That's good. Then the spark will ignite and everything will fall in love. No, it's funny that I'm meeting you for the first time with cameras rolling, but it's exciting also. I've been keeping up with The Magicians. I think my friend Gina gave me the first book, The Magicians, and I think you had me at Magic Missiles, well, maybe earlier than that. That comes partway through the book.
It's partway through, but
you're drawing a lot. I'm thrilled because you seem to be drawing from so many of the same influences that so many of the same things that I'm into. And I wonder, like, what was your goal in all of this? Like, were you thinking, how much can I jam in? How much of what I like can I jam into one book?
Yeah,
something like that.
What was my goal?
Yeah.
I guess there's a sort of, I'm going to get myself in trouble by saying this. I guess there's a sort of strain of fantasy which is kind of, and which I love, but which is very sort of unself-conscious. If the Harry Potter books, for example, which I love, no one in the Harry Potter books reads novels. They read Tales of Beedle the Bard, but that's the only fiction, as far as I know, that exists in the Potterverse. One of the experiments of The Magicians was, what if we had the people who are going to magic school, they also have read fantasy novels. And what if we tried to sort of imbue fantasy with a little bit of the self-awareness? Watchmen was a really formative experience for me growing up, reading Watchmen. And that was a book where you knew that the author had read every superhero comic that there was, and had very complicated, conflicting feelings about it. I sort of felt the same way about fantasy. I wanted to write fantasy, but I also wanted it to be a little bit sort of self-aware. And yeah, there are things in there like magic missiles for those who have eyes to see.
Sure.
There's a lot of D&D in the books. Mostly people pick up on the J.K. Rowling allusions of C.S. Lewis. There's at least as much Dungeons and Dragons in there, which was huge thing. So did you play Dungeons and Dragons?
I still do. We still meet every week and play D&D. So
does that feed into your work?
It is like. Yeah, it does. We do a little bit of experimental role-playing to different genres, playing games, and the best is it's like a free-form storytelling, so there's no pressure with it. And so my weekly role-playing is a very fun because I drive there and listen to music, and then like little story stuff happens, and then I get there and it's kind of free-form. Like unexpected things happen. Other people are in your story. Other players are influencing that, and if you don't want it to go that way, too bad, because you're playing with other people. So it's enriching. It doesn't I can't think of any one idea that's actually fed into right into a narrative, but it's definitely enriching.
But does the role playing in general, sort of just that whole idea of just kind of being in that group role playing environment, does that affect? Clearly, that's had some effect on what you've done in The Magicians.
Do you still play anything?
I haven't played for a while. I have played as an adult. I have trouble finding the games that have fit my schedule.
No, I understand that.
For me, a lot of it was just how they'd sat down and really worked out how a lot of this stuff worked. Gandalf, he's doing magic. You know he's doing it because they're telling you, but you don't really see how he's doing it. Is he talking? Is he moving his hands? Does he need a special herb or whatever? How often can he do this?
Pyrotechnics going on with Gandalf.
How long does it take him?
Does he mix these things?
But the Dungeons and Dragons guys, they had to work all that stuff out in a very literal way. So when I wanted to write a fantasy novel that I felt was like as realistic as I could possibly make it, I kind of turned to Dungeons and Dragons because they'd thought through all this stuff that nobody else had really worked out.
Right. And those are, in the magician's books, I think that when they're working on very difficult, long, magical projects are some of my favorite parts of the books. Like some of the things that I appreciate the most is like, I think there's a scene in The Magician's Land where they're working in an apartment.
Right, yeah.
And that whole process, I think, and whatever the magical project that they're working on takes weeks.
Yeah.
And effort and all of this, and trial and error. And, and I really appreciated that quite a lot. And as they go, you see different sides of the magical world. You see the underbelly. You see what happens when you're kind of out of the mainstream as a magician.
Yeah.
And the world building that you did through the 3 books has been really interesting to me. And Sue, can you talk about world building?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's just about readers have very high standards for world building these days. I find, Narnia, you could get away with. Lewis could get away with. Narnia doesn't have a working economy. You don't know very much about the ecology of Narnia. But now readers are very aware of that stuff, and they want everything to work together and fit together. So world building is you start with a few rules and then just try to work forward and figure out what the logical implications of those rules are. So, for example, I felt as though if there are magicians at work in the world among us, that the divide between magician and non-magician, which they will police aggressively, still maybe isn't as neat as they hope it is.
Right.
And there's some people floating around in that gray area between wizard and muggle who are trying stuff and they don't know what they're doing, but they know magic's real. They sort of half figured it out. Just sort of exploring those little crevices is kind of fascinating to me.
Yeah, yeah.
When the first Magician's book came out, there was a lot of comparisons to Harry Potter. Obviously, Harry Potter for adults. We all heard it. How do you think that that book influenced your own writing of this? And did you think that was sort of like, okay, there's an opening here for me to go do this. I've always been thinking about this. Or did you think like that was just sort of bad timing that Harry Potter was happening at that same time?
Well, I had the idea of writing a book set at a magic school in 95, 96. I was a big fan of Le Guin's Earthsea books, which have this wonderful school for magic. You only send about a couple chapters there, but I always wanted the characters to go back to the school, because I really liked that part. And I thought, what if you had a whole book that was set at a school for magic? And then Harry Potter came out, and I just was like, whoa, let's put that aside. And yet, in mid-2000s, I just kept coming back to the fact that I was so attached to Harry Potter and that story, and also I was aware that my life was very different from Harry's, and I was dealing with very different problems from his. I lived in America, which is very different, and almost as a thought experiment, I thought, well, what if you retell this story? The story of the education of a wizard, set it in America, age it up a bit so that all the stuff that YA fantasy tends to leave out, like all the sex and the drugs and sort of depression and disappointment and stuff like that. What if we feed that back in and just
the Watchmen effect?
It's very much the Watchmen effect. Yeah. Can't overstate how much Watchmen was a model for these books. I sort of tried. I said, what if you Watchmenized Harry Potter? That was the thought experiment. So I was very aware, and I owe a massive debt to J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
Some people make the mistake of thinking that I was criticizing her, or I don't like Harry Potter. I love Harry Potter.
Right.
I've been to many Harry Potter conventions. I have a deep, deep affection for them. And yet, when I tried to write something, I had to figure out how to make it different.
Yeah. We succeeded. So what I think about all the time when I think about these books is you go through, your life is busy, as you mentioned. You have a tough time getting to Dungeons & Dragons meetings now. And yet this world is living in your head constantly as you're walking down the street or doing other jobs or writing other pieces. There's an enormous world in these 3 books.
Yeah.
How do you sort of separate that world that you've created from just walking, going to do your other jobs that you have as a writer?
Well, there's a little bleed over here and there. I mean, one of the great things, the fun things about writing in the magician's world is that it's very close to our world. One of my rules for myself was that everything that exists in our world has to also exist in the magician's verse, plus magic, except minus C.S. Lewis, because that would just get too complicated. But everything else is there. So probably more than in some other fantasy writers, I get to draw on my daily experience all the time for magician stuff. And it's funny because I have a whole other career as a journalist telling stories that are putatively non-fictional. And it's funny how much of the storytelling techniques are useful in both worlds.
Really? That's really interesting. And you told me off camera that your daughter reads Ben's stuff, and Ben, I know I don't think your daughters are reading
My kids
Lev
aren't up to
necessarily.
the yet, but,
How old are your kids?
the oldest is 12, going
Right.
on 13, so a few years, couple years.
Yeah, my daughter's 11. She has read The Magicians, very much over my objections.
Sure.
Not a good idea.
Yeah.
But when a child is desperate to read something, and you have 50 copies of it in your house, it's hard to.
And when Dad wrote the book, I mean, they want to check, right?
I think they wonder what I'm up to
Sure,
in that
yeah.
room all the time.
Really, at 11? I don't know if my kids were necessarily worried all that much about what I was doing, but I love the fact that she read it. What did she think?
You know, she really loved it. I mean, she was really. I think it's. You couldn't have found a more receptive audience for my work than my daughter's, because it's something now she gets to share with her dad. It's dedicated to her. It's actually kind of a fun bond that we have, and she likes talking animals, and I think probably skips over a lot of the other stuff. She got into your stuff because I so much wanted to get her into comics.
Right.
And there wasn't, I felt like, that much that was in her wheelhouse in the comics world.
Okay, but Zita kind of struck a chord then.
Yeah, very much. I don't know if she'd read comics, she'd read comic strips, but never a whole graphic novel.
Okay.
It was really immersive for her in a way that, only comics can be in a certain way.
Well, I hope my next couple ones, I hope I can get them out quickly enough for her to appreciate them. I'm working on a series called Mighty Jack, so it's a little bit aged up from Zita.
That's good, because she also is aging.
That's what I'm saying.
Over my objections.
I'm going to try to draw quickly enough that she doesn't age beyond it.
Although you've also looped in my 4-year-old and 2-year-old with Julia's
there we
House of
go.
Lost Creatures.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely continuing the picture books.
Yeah, good. Are you doing any more Julia books, or is that one-off?
That's a talk that we're having.
Yeah.
Julia might turn out to be a trilogy, and then there's the next one that comes out. The next picture book is about a goblin, so that's my D&D story.
Right.
And it's definitely kind of a love note to that.
But from the goblin perspective?
Oh yeah.
Goblin
yeah,
synthetic.
it's this little goblin, and he's in a dungeon, and then these terrible adventurers come, and like adventurers do. You don't think about the goblin, you just kill the goblins in the dungeon.
Yeah.
You don't care. They're goblins. But this little goblin's just going about his day, and everybody just charges in. They steal everything from the dungeon. He only has one friend who is Skeleton, who lives in the dungeon, and they play games together. Skeleton used to be somebody, so Skeleton lets Goblin try on his crown, and when Goblin comes out, he hides, and when he comes out when the adventurers are gone, everything's gone, and they've taken Skeleton. And all he's got left is this crown. So he puts the crown on, and he goes out into the wide world to find Skeleton.
Wow.
Adventure.
Well,